In this particular topic, we're going to be discussing an interaction that we can sometimes see in wheat where we use a specific herbicide chemistry that sometimes can interact with liquid nitrogen or any of the nitrogen sources we apply in the spring to the wheat. This is somewhat of a unique interaction. We've not seen this with other crops, but in wheat in particular, there's two herbicides, Osprey and Powerflex, which are widely used for managing ryegrass and some of the other grasses in wheat, that if we apply those products fairly close to the time that we're top dressing nitrogen, can result into some injury. Sometimes it can be pretty significant injury. So the labels of these products address that particular issue by basically advising the grower, the applicator, to wait so many days before they apply their liquid nitrogen. If they put down their product, whether it's Osprey, which requires a 2-week window either before or after you're applying your Osprey. With Powerflex, it's a 7-day interval. I'm standing in front of a plot right now that has been sprayed with Osprey, and 2 weeks prior to the application of the Osprey, we put down our liquid nitrogen. So we would be within the label by doing that particular type of operation. What we'll do is maybe go through some of these plots and look to see if there's any injury. I might add, what we're seeing here today, because of the uniqueness of the situation here that we've had the weather conditions this spring, you're going to see some frost damage, and those tips of the leaves that are burnt, that's not typical of what you would associate with this particular injury. I might also add that if you have warm weather like what we've experienced in this spring, if you have those kind of conditions, why it's likely if you do get an injury that it's going to outgrow that pretty rapidly, and that's what we've seen this year. In fact, we're probably late by about a week. Had we done this filming a week ago, well, I think we would have seen more injury and more results there. But let's go through some of the different application timings and see what we're seeing. Yeah, I'm standing in front of a plot now that was treated with our liquid nitrogen 1 week ahead of our Osprey, and the wheat basically did not show any signs of injury soon after we sprayed it. In fact, we've been monitoring it. There's no injury there, even though the label requires 2 weeks. This particular treatment applied 7 days before the Osprey was certainly a success. We'll go to the next one where I would anticipate if there's going to be a problem, it's going to be if we apply the liquid nitrogen and the herbicide on the same day. Yes, right now I'm standing in between two plots where the liquid nitrogen was applied at the same day the Osprey. The plots over to my right, it received Osprey. The plots over to my left did not receive Osprey. And when you compare them right now, there's perhaps a slight bit of height difference here. It's pretty hard to see with the camera, I'm sure, but there is a little bit of stunting going over here where Osprey was applied as opposed to where Osprey was not applied. And I can tell you back about a week earlier, there certainly was a difference in terms of the coloration. Certainly there was some yellowing going on with our where our herbicide was applied as opposed to where it was not applied. So yeah, there's no doubt that some injury did occur here, but given the weather conditions that we've had been so favorable for wheat to grow, what injury did occur is basically starting to dissipate, where we can't hardly tell the difference between where we sprayed the herbicide or where we did not. We didn't limit our this demonstration just to Osprey. We also looked at other herbicides. One that's closely related to Osprey that also has this interaction with nitrogen is off to my right, and that one is called Powerflex. We didn't see any kind of response even at day 0 there. And might also add that we looked at a couple of 3 other chemistries as well. 2,4-D off to my left, then behind me is Axial and Harmony Extra, which is an ALS inhibitor, but it doesn't carry that kind of a characteristic that what we see with Osprey or Powerflex. So this interaction, as I indicated earlier, is pretty unique to both the products Osprey and Powerflex. You know, in this particular demonstration, we're looking at the response of 4 different wheat varieties to a herbicide called metribuzin. Some people may know that product is Syncor. It's been around for a very long time. We use it in wheat for managing certain problem weeds, one of which is some of the ALS-resistant chickweed has been certainly a concern for a number of wheat farmers. And this particular chemistry here, the metribuzin, does a pretty decent job of managing chickweed. So we like to use it, but there's a little caveat to it. There is a risk of using varieties that may be susceptible to metribuzin. Not that there's a lot of those varieties out there to be concerned with, but there are some we think that we have seen. And so this prompted us to look at this demonstration to show that there are some differences in susceptibility of wheat varieties to the metribuzin. Products in this particular case were sprayed directly in front of me, centering up on these pink flags. Each wheat plot is a different variety, and in that particular case, the two lower varieties closest to the camera or farthest from me are ones that are susceptible. And what we have seen in past screenings, that they appear to show some susceptibility to metribuzin. A little bit less tolerant is this second one for me. You'll see some regrowth occurring, and in this particular one here, there's quite a bit of regrowth that occurred. But if a grower sees this injury, that would certainly raise a concern, even where we didn't get nearly as much as some of these other plots. This is a very significant injury, especially it surprised us to see this much injury with 8 ounces, but that's the high-end rate of metribuzin, and it's one that we rarely use. So, the question is, maybe we can cut back on those rates and see a less of a response. And in some of the other plots that we have here, we have used less metribuzin and don't see nearly the amount of damage. And it certainly doesn't stand out nearly as much as what we see here in this particular case, where there is quite a bit of injury from the metribuzin. In this particular demonstration, we're making some comparisons of growth regulators or hormone herbicides is what we're talking about. For example, 2,4-D or Clarity. Clarity is a product that contains dicamba, which is in a lot of other products as well. But Clarity and 2,4-D are the products that we are looking in this demonstration, and in particular is looking at different timings and growth stages. The particular plot I'm standing in right now was applied several weeks ago, actually right at or prior to planting of wheat. The middle plot there, it was applied last fall, post-emergence, before going into the winter. And then the third plot on down was applied when it's normally recommended, that is around fully tillered, just prior to jointing. That typically is the safest time to be applying most of these growth regulators that we use in wheat. Got to emphasize, the pre-emergence and the fall post-emergence applications of 2,4-D are not labeled for use in wheat, and perhaps for good reasons, because there is a risk of injury. But if you look at the plots right now, you'd have to say that you don't see any symptoms of injury. While that may be true, let's give it another month to 6 weeks, and as this plant starts to produce a seed head and to develop in that manner, it's going to show some symptoms at a particular time, if there is such a thing as injury can happen. That is typical of 2,4-D. However, in regard to Clarity or some of the other products that contain dicamba, the labels of many of those products will tell you can apply it any time before, during, or after planting of wheat, but prior to jointing. That's a very wide window. Applying it in the fall is something that we just rarely ever think of as applying growth hormones, but it is labeled in that fashion, and we've got it included in this particular demonstration, and we'll compare that to the 2,4-D and see what happens here in another month and a half. In this demonstration, we're going to be talking about tank mix clean out, and also the possibility of drift issues. In the spring, when there's a lot of work to be done, there's no doubt that when we're out spraying our wheat, either for weeds or insects, or putting nitrogen on wheat, we're also having to spray corn ground with those burn down products. And when you get that kind of scenario where you're trying to spray both corn and wheat, it's critical that you clean out your tanks, and also be critical to observe what the weather conditions are to avoid any drift that you'd have, say, from your corn ground over to your standing wheat. So in this particular demonstration, what we're going to show is some of the symptomology of some of those cases where we've seen in the past, okay? One particular issue is with Valor, very good herbicide that's used in corn and soybeans as well. If we're putting down our herbicides in the Valor in particular in the spring, about the same time that we're applying our nitrogen to our wheat, if we don't clean that tank out, the symptoms that you're seeing, much like what we're here in front of me here right now, is a lot of stunted wheat. That particular, I might add, is this is a 2-ounce rate. Here's a 0.2 of an ounce rate of Valor, and you don't see nearly the stunting, but there is some stunting going on. Had we been here and filmed this last week, I think we would have seen symptoms more visible. But in this particular case, a lot of the wheat is starting to outgrow that because we've had favorable weather for good growth. So in time, this is going to catch up with some of the other wheat. But it is an issue, and it can look very discerning to a grower who sees this kind of a problem. Typical symptoms with Valor, if it's an issue where you spray over top standing wheat, is these speckles, so to speak. It's a really almost like brown dots and yellow in the center. You'll see that yellowing in somewhat of translucent areas in the growth that received the herbicide. But as I stated earlier, you can see there's a lot of healthy leaves in there that's going to outgrow this injury. But we've been in here and filming this last week, we would see a lot more growth showing these kind of burning effects here with Valor. Another product that can cause the same type of symptoms is Sharpen and Verdict, or both of them contain the same active ingredient, saflufenicil. They can cause essentially the same kind of symptom that you were seeing here with Valor. Here's another example where we've seen examples of where tank mix contamination can lead to problems. Lead off is a very popular herbicide used in burn down programs in corn and sometimes in soybeans. And as I stated earlier, if we're putting down those burn downs and fail to clean out that sprayer before we come in and spray our wheat, what you're seeing here in front of me right now is the kind of examples of what we have seen sometimes where lead off wasn't cleaned out of the spray tank effectively. And but basically the symptoms that we're talking about here are really stunted plants. That's typical with the ALS chemistry that lead off has in it. Stunting, generally a yellowing appearance. A fair amount of that yellowing appearance, if you will, is already dissipated. Some of the growth, some plants are starting to outgrow that. But what you'll see typically initially is the symptoms will start to appear yellow at the base of the leaves, and in time that will outgrow that, but it takes time. This is a very slow-acting chemistry. It takes a very long time for those plants to recover from that damage. What we may do is take a close-up now and show you what I'm looking at here. A lot of this has already outgrown that effect. This sort of a yellowing appearance, almost necrotic leaves and leaf sheaths. These leaf sheaths, a lot of them show that yellowing effect, if you will. Those are the type of symptoms you would expect to see with lead off. Yeah, you know, here's another example of, and it's a very common one, is issues with tank mix contamination with glyphosate. And what we're looking at here is just try to show various rates of glyphosate, and depending on the concentration in the tank, how well you clean the tank out. This particular plot that I'm standing in front of has 2 ounces of acid equivalent, if you will. That's about 1/8 of a pound of acid equivalent of glyphosate. It's not very much, is what we're really trying to emphasize. But if you can see from the white flag towards the direction of the camera, there is no doubt there is some effect. While it may not be as nearly as dramatic as much higher rates, there has been some effect on the growth of this wheat plant compared to where it was not sprayed behind this white flag, okay? So glyphosate is one of those products that is a very common product that we use for burn down programs in lots of our crops. And a prime example here of what we see sometimes come in the diagnostic lab where someone that didn't clean the tank out. The wheat looks a little bit unusual. It stopped its growth, but it's not completely dying. It's those low rates, kind of subtle effects, if you will. Now the plot that's directly behind me is sprayed with the same amount of glyphosate. But ammonium sulfate was included in the tank. Okay, that's the difference between this plot versus that one, and you can see that there's no doubt that there's a much more stunting, discoloration, if you will, occurring in that plot where AMS was included in the tank, as opposed to in this case here where AMS was not in the tank. So this can kind of add to the dilemma here. I mean, if you've got an injury issue, had you used ammonium sulfate, probably you're going to enhance some of the activity of that glyphosate. Certainly you're going to speed the activity of that glyphosate.